Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the Property Buyer and Sellers Podcast. How are you? I hope you're well. It is Friday, the 15th of November, 2024. By the way, sorry we weren't around last week to update you after the interest rate changes. Good news. We've got three things to discuss with you today. Of course, we've got the interest rates, and that's good news. Then also we've got to talk about stamp duty after the budget announcements and renters' rights and landlords selling up. They're the three topics I want to cover today for you. Let's start with you first-time buyers out there. Now, I suspect, well, I already know from the coalface here at James Alexander, what we're experiencing is more first-time buyers coming through the door and more people looking to buy, particularly up to 425,000. Now, this is particularly good news for sellers if you have a flat, because as many of you out there will know, flat sales have been dire over the past couple of years, particularly flats without outdoor space. Since COVID and lockdown, everybody's found that outdoor space is very valuable and they want their own place with a balcony or a garden. So that's become a real change. And since the budget announcement that they won't be extending the stamp duty relief after April 2025, we now have a short window of time where first-time buyers will be looking to get in because they can save a substantial amount of money by buying before April 2025. And that's particularly so here in and around London because the savings are significant. For instance, we're talking about the difference. If you were buying at 400,000, we're talking about a saving of £5,000. Now, that might not seem significant to you, but when you're a first-time buyer trying to scrape together every penny, that could be your new kitchen or your central heating system right there. So people will be looking to take advantage of this. Will it create a temporary blip? Who knows? Wouldn't be the first time, would it? Time will tell on that. But what we can say is that we're already seeing and experiencing an uptake in demand. So if you've got a flat and you've been struggling to sell or thinking of selling over the last few years, could be a good opportunity for you to get involved. Now, normally I say over the Christmas period, hold off because it tends to be much slower. But I think now, with people recognizing that although April is a long way away on the one hand, in terms of property sales, particularly leasehold property, it can take a while to go through. And therefore, you need to get things going as early as possible. So first-time buyers are back in some numbers. Let's hope that continues, because if you're selling a flat, that's great news. But actually, it's better than that. It's good news for the whole market. And the reason it's good news for the whole market is without the flat buyers at the bottom, well, the guy with the flat can't sell. Guess what? He doesn't buy the house. And so the whole chain is affected right up to the really expensive houses when first-time buyers can't get involved. And then, of course, if you put on top of that the nail in the coffin that was the extra stamp duty for buy-to-let investors, now at 5% additional premium on top of stamp duty, there are very few buy-to-let investors investing right now. And that means that the market is wholly reliant or largely reliant on the first-time buyer. So these two things together mean that there's a change. We're not looking at investment buyers anymore, but to be honest, we haven't really been for some time. The first-time buyers have been king, and it does put them in charge. They've got a little bit more in terms of choice. And of course, the flip side of this is investors are running for the hills in many cases. And I was looking at an article earlier on, and it's quite interesting, actually. This is an article in Landlord Today, a crisis point, over 40% of landlords to sell property in coming year. Now, this says that new data reveals the chronic shortage of homes available to meet demand. 79% of landlords report that the demand for housing was strong in the third quarter. And what they're basically saying is that the landlords represented over 19% of properties that were sold over the previous 12 months. And then over the next 12 months, or the last 12 months, I should say, 41% of landlords said that they were planning to sell at least some of their rental stock. Now, this is very bad news for tenants, because those decisions in the budget to actually charge landlords more for the purchase, coupled with the fact that landlords are already exiting the market in numbers, means that there will be less and less available stock for the tenants out there to choose from. And I know some will argue, yes, but first-time buyers will take advantage of this because there'll be more stock and therefore that might help them get onto the ladder. And I'm all for that. But the problem is the most vulnerable can't afford to buy anyway, and they need that rental stock, and this is not good. And Ben Beadle, lovely guy who runs the National Residential Landlords Association, quoted as follows: "Tenants the length and breadth of the country now know there are not enough homes to rent. Rather than seeking to tackle it, the government is instead doubling down on policies that have caused a chasm between supply and demand to widen in the first place. Well, I echo that. Well said, Ben. And by the way, if you're not a member of the NRLA, you should be if you're a landlord. It's very valuable resources there and well worth it. He goes on to say, whilst landlords selling up might benefit a minority of tenants in a position to afford a home, for the vast majority will face a growing struggle to access rental homes. It's time for a change. Of course, we need policies to support the provision of decent quality homes for private rent alongside all other tenures. Well, I would agree that. And I think, the idea, what we've got here is, let's be honest, it's soundbite politics, isn't it? Rachel Reeves saying, let's bash the landlord because they're awful people. And that is never a good place to be when you've got a limited resource that is desperately needed. If the government had an answer, it would be great. If they said, look, we've got all these millions of council homes that we can provide instead, that would be wonderful. Because the bottom line is the people at the very bottom are the ones that are impacted the most by this. Now, compounding that, one of the rules that are coming across loud and clear on the new Renters Rigts Bill, which is coming next year, is that landlords will no longer be able to take upfront rent payments other than the traditional 5 weeks deposit. Why does this matter? Well, if you've got bad credit or you have a low income, you're a higher risk to a landlord than someone that has a high income or doesn't have bad credit. What does this mean? Well, in reality, it means that the poorest in society and the ones that struggle most will struggle to enter the rental market, because what's happened in the past is that landlords have said, well, look, I really like you. I think I'll take a risk on you, but I need to make sure by taking some advance monies, maybe for 6 months or so, it will be illegal to do that. So this will mean that the people at the very bottom of the pile will find it even harder than they already do. And trust me, it's hard enough for these people already. So I think it's a desperately sad situation, and one that's not been thought through by the government. I'm sure I'm not the first one to say that. Now, first-time buyers, what can you do to make sure that you take advantage of the stamp duty deadline? Number one, get your ducks in a row out there, folks. This is really important. So if you're a first-time buyer, and many of my friends' children mainly have been contacting me and asking for advice on this. They're looking to buy. What should they buy? Where should they buy? That's a conversation for a whole other day. But what I always say to them is, let's get our ducks in a row first of all. Number one, would you go to Sainsbury's or Tesco's without knowing how much money you've got to spend on your shopping? Well, no, you wouldn't. And the same is true in housing. You need to get ready, and you get ready by, number one, understanding what you can afford. And you do that by seeing an independent financial advisor. This is not financial advice because we're not IFAs, we're not independent financial advisors, but you must get your ducks in a row. And by doing that, they will advise you on what it's potentially possible for you to borrow from a bank or building society. Because without this information, you can't really go forward knowing what your budget can be. And the advantage in doing that is that then you not only know what your budget is, but you know what the monthly repayment costs are likely to be. So you can literally go out looking and thinking to yourself, right, if I bought this flat, it would cost me X per month, whereas my rent at the moment is Y per month. And you can get a real handle on that. And that's really good too, because it allows you to really have some perspective on where it will leave you when, the estate agent's gone and perhaps the shiny new property that you're looking at doesn't look quite so good when you've moved in, and you're looking at those bills and those mortgage payments. So number one, get yourself a financial advisor. Make sure they're a good one. Take a recommendation. Don't go for someone that you don't know anyone that's used or hasn't got a good reputation. Make sure you research that thoroughly. My advice would be go for an independent financial advisor as opposed to someone that works in a single bank building society, because they can give you access to the whole of the market, whereas a bank can only advise you about their products and their attitude to risk. And sometimes, particularly for people like self-employed or people with low deposits, there are some lenders that will consider your circumstances, but it doesn't feel very good when you go down to the local bank and they say to you, no. They don't say, oh, there might be another lender. They just say no. It's a horrible feeling. So that's why see an independent financial advisor, and they can give you advice about the whole of market and the lenders that would be best suited to you. And they can also advise you of which ones to approach and what the likely costs will be. So well worth doing. That's number one. Now, number two, you need to get a good solicitor. This is really important, especially for you first-time buyers out there. Listen up. And the reason is that you're probably buying a leasehold property. Now, leasehold property takes longer. It just takes longer. Why? Well, because there's a managing agent involved 9 times out of 10, and that means there are charges to be paid. You need to understand what they are, why they are, whether they're reasonable, and then there are all sorts of other legal considerations within the lease itself, the freehold, the ground rent, All these things are really important and you need to know about them. And your solicitor is the person that's going to give you that advice. So really important that you consider going for a solicitor that's not necessarily the cheapest. We never advise going for the cheapest here at James Alexander because, and it's not about commissions, we don't care who you use when you're buying through us. What we care about is making sure the transaction goes through smoothly and efficiently. And that involves employing someone that A, has got your back, B, has got the time and capacity to deal with you in a timely fashion. And this is going to get harder and harder as we get towards April. And there are more and more people going to be demanding that they get that completion in order to get that probably 5,000 or so advantage. So solicitors are going to be busy. And that's why first-time buyers, I think right now is the best time to start looking. And I wouldn't normally say that this time of year because there is restricted supply, but I think we'll start to see supply open up as people realize that first-time buyers out there are starting to get their act together and go out looking in anticipation of maybe it being too late. Because actually, with the average transaction time in the UK between 16 and 20 weeks, you could well find yourself buying a place in January or February and not meeting that April deadline. Because remember, it's early April. So in actual fact, you've got January, February, March. And then if you take out the holiday period, that's a very short window. So now is the time to start looking if you want to take advantage of that stamp duty window. That's my advice to you out there, first-time buyers. Make sure you buy carefully and make sure you understand what it is you're buying. Your solicitors will help you with that. So make sure you go for a high-quality solicitor. I know there's temptation out there to go for a cheap onliner. Often, in my experience, these are just paper shufflers with one licensed conveyancer at the top of the tree who you can never reach. And you'll find yourself on the phone, on hold, as if you're speaking to a local authority, just waiting, listening to some hold music, usually awful. You know the feeling. You won't get that from a high quality solicitor that has the time for you. Why do they have the time for you? Because you pay them properly. That's why. And this is the difference. So make sure you choose one where perhaps they're not the cheapest, but they will have you back. They'll have your interests at heart and they'll be available to you at the end of the phone when you need them. You do need that contact. Now, I know that in these days of email, it can be tempting to think, well, yeah, but I can get things on emails. And you can, but there will be points in the transaction where you need rapid advice. And that's where you need an actual physical person that is a solicitor or licensed conveyancer, as opposed to a licensed conveyancer or solicitor's assistant who perhaps can't give you the full advice that you need when you need it. So that's interest rates next. As far as interest rates are concerned, well, we've seen them come down a quarter point. What's next? Well, we've got another interest rate window coming up in December. What I mean by that is there's a meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee, and they then will have another look at interest rates. And the next date for that will be, I'm just looking it up now for you. The December one is 19th of December. So that could be a nice Christmas present, couldn't it? 19th of December, we'll find out whether interest rates are going to change again. There are already some quite competitive deals out there, though, and first-time buyers, the bigger the deposit you can put down, the better, for two reasons. Number one, lenders will perceive you as less of a risk if you have a high deposit. And number two, sellers will see you as less of a risk. And this is really important. It's not just about you. And this is where it comes back down to having your ducks in a row, because when you make an offer to an estate agent, if you get your ducks in a row, you can really steal a march on other buyers. And it's not just about the money. Who knew? It's not just about money. It's about your efficiency. So quite often we found that we've got two buyers very similar, and then we have one who provides everything we need within a day, and another one takes a week to come back with. Guess who wins? Always the one that's efficient and ready, because sellers are nervous. Why are they nervous? Because if you drag your heels on stage one, who knows how you're going to drag your heels on stage two? So it's really important that when you deal with these things that you're efficient, because this will allow you to get the purchase you want, securing that property by being efficient. How do you do that? Well, another thing I'll tell you, you need to get your ID together and ready. Estate agents have an obligation to understand where the money that you're using for deposit comes from under anti-money laundering regulations. And this means they're going to ask you where your deposit is, and they're going to want to see evidence of it and possibly where it came from. This is important because if you know that in advance, then you can prepare. And if you're prepared when you make an offer and you can provide, for instance, a copy passport, utility bill dated within the last 3 months, proof of your funds, your solicitor's details, an agreement in principle from a mortgage broker, you're going to be ahead of everybody else. So if you want to beat the queue, these are the things you need to do. When you make an offer, attach proof of your funds, your passport copy, your utility bill copy, and all of a sudden you're ahead of the game. Others will be making offers and waiting for a call back, and bang, there you are in the estate agent's inbox with all the paperwork they haven't yet asked you for. Now let's make a little list of that so you know what we need. Number one, passport copy. Number two, we want a utility bill or correspondence in your name at your address within the last 3 months. You'll also want that from your partner as well. Then we want to see the bank statement or similar proving the funds in your account. If they're in someone else's account, then you need to explain why that is, what's going to happen, and then it might well be that the estate agent needs to carry out the same due diligence on their account. But for now, let's assume that you have that money in your account. Don't be afraid to share that with an agent. It's quite normal for them to want to understand where your money is and that you actually physically have it. Because believe it or not, some people will lie about that and they'll say they've got a deposit when in fact it's tied up in a sale and that sale's not completed, or worse, it's tied up in the sale of a property that's not even on the market yet. So it's really important that you prove that you have the cash you say you have. So we're looking at, make sure you provide your solicitor's details, your proof of deposit, your proof of identification, and hopefully an agreement in principle, or what we call a DIP, or decision in principle, from your mortgage broker or lender. With all these things together, you will increase confidence in yourself as far as the agent is concerned. And this is critical to make sure that you get considered when you're making an offer above others that are also looking at the same property. Now, I hope that's helpful to you. Thanks for listening as ever. That's it for this week on the Property Buyer and Sellers Podcast. We'll be back next week with another edition. Till then, look after yourselves and your family. But one more thing before I go. This next 2 months, we're creating an appeal for a local food bank here in Norbury. There are lots of people here in Norbury, believe it or not, that actually can't afford to feed themselves. It's really sad. So what we're doing this Christmas is we're actually starting an appeal. And that appeal's on Just Giving. If you look up Ken Hume on Just Giving, and we are looking to fund a food bank for £2,500, and £35 buys a week's food and a Christmas dinner for someone that can't afford to feed themselves. So we think this is a really valuable appeal, and we don't mind what you give. Give £1 if you like, give £2, give £10, but it would be lovely to know that you've listened to this podcast and made a donation. And if you do, please make a comment, podcast, the amount and your name, and anything from £1 will do. If you can give £10, wonderful. If you can give £35, that's amazing. That's someone's Christmas dinner and week shopping, because the food bank closes over Christmas. And that, imagine that, you've got no food over Christmas and you've got no Christmas dinner either. I mean, the no Christmas dinner is probably standard for a lot of these people, right? Well, this year we're going to change that. We're going to make it so they get a Christmas dinner here in Norbury. And the lovely Liberty Food Bank is prepared and up for that, and they're very grateful for what we've done so far. We're just over 10% in terms of where we want to be. We need to raise £2,500. I think we're currently at 270. If you would like to donate, then do drop me an email, ken@jamesalexander.com, and I can send you the link, or just go on the Just Giving website, look up Ken Hume, Hume, and you will find my page looking to raise money for the Norbury Liberty Food Bank. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope you have a great week. We're back next week with another edition. Till then, do send in your comments. Always love to hear from you. If you have any questions that you'd like to raise and we can air them on the show, bring them on. ken@jamesalexander.com, or give us a call here in the office, 0208 679 8601. Take care of yourselves and your family. Ciao.